Hello everyone, welcome back to another video from Learner's Path Philippines, and today we have with us a motivational guest, and that is Sir Von Ryan Abrantes. As I'll introduce him on his behalf for a little bit, he is a TEDx speaker for the speech Puhon, Language and Resilience of the Filipino, and he talked about the different contributors to building resilience and how his experiences as a Filipino proved the role for his development. He is also an academic educator at Upper Division of Avenues, the World School in New York, USA. That's a little bit about him, but now I'll give him the honor to officially introduce himself.
All right, thank you, Zeke, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here as well. My name is Von. My students call me Mr. Abrantes. When I used to teach in the Philippines, they just called me Sir Von. I've been teaching for 13 years now. 4 years of it I spent in the Philippines before I left to teach in an international school in the Cayman Islands, and then I moved here to New York. Yeah, and I did that TEDx speech almost 3 years ago. It was hosted by our school here in Manhattan, and the main theme of that was looking through the looking glass. And so it's all about perspective and like how we view things from different perspectives. And so I decided to deliver a speech that's uniquely a perspective of mine as a Filipino. So it's something that I probably have individually in our school, because currently I'm the only Filipino, like pure Filipino in the institution. We have some Filipino Americans in the school faculty, but I'm currently the only Filipino who grew up in the Philippines. Yeah, I grew up in Valenzuela City. So if anyone's familiar with that, so that's my hometown. So I consider myself Bulaqueño, but my parents are both from Leyte. Yeah.
And knowing that you taught both in the Philippines and New York, and also in the Cayman Islands, I wanted to ask, what are the differences in being a teacher in the Philippines and the US? And if New York was a different environment, how did you adapt to it?
Thank you. So main thing is like culture. Of course, we have a different culture in the Philippines. I would say it's more closely related to the Asian culture of Southeast Asia, like expectations. That comes with it all the positive and the drawbacks of our of a certain culture. You have a different social political arena as well. Things that are culturally acceptable and probably frowned upon. And so when I moved to a different country, I was aware that that would be something I have to adjust to. But generally, I would say that students in different parts of the world have different intrinsic motivation to do well in school. So that's what, like, one particular thing that I've observed. Like, what is it that propels a student to do well in school, to exert effort beyond what is required in the Philippines? It's mostly different um, to other students, and I would say that's because of the different contexts that they're in. Like, I grew up in a family that's not really well off. Like, we struggled financially, and so it's inculcated to me intrinsically that I have to do well in school, because that's like, we say in the Philippines, it's the greatest equalizer. So a rich person is the same, has the same dignity, supposedly, or same value to me, especially when I'm as educated as that person. So it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, whether you're a prominent family or not. If you receive the same education, you should have the same opportunities, and like, you're on a level playing field. I know obviously politically that sometimes it's like, questionable, but in our context in the Philippines, it's usually often viewed as that. Whereas in the side of the world, some, especially in the school that I teach in, you have some kids that are well off, from families that are financially very stable. So I often like tell the kids, like, tap on that, find that intrinsic motivation of yours, because sometimes that's what propels you to do well. Is it to make sure that you can be proud of your own achievement? Is it to, like, make sure that you make your parents proud, or you want to pursue something that you're passionate about. Regardless of what it is, you need to find a motivation that will make you work harder. Because if you don't have that, that's going to be hard for you. And I find that in the Philippines, it's mostly something that is fueled by external events. Our family struggling. This is the state of our society. I want to make some. I want to do better because I want to improve myself, my family, and the people around me. Yeah.
I can relate to that. Thank you so much for giving that comparison. And so diving more into your TEDx talk, I wanted to ask, how does society and the media depict Filipinos in terms of happiness? And
Mm.
do you think that perception is true?
Yeah, thank you. That's quite really related to what I talked about in my TEDx talks, because we Filipinos usually are viewed as like resilient. We're a resilient people, meaning like we easily bounce back from like drawbacks in life, or like disappointments or tragedies. We um we are like we cope essentially. But the tricky thing and the interesting thing about resilience is that it's multifaceted. Different factors contribute to a person being resilient, and most of the time um people are like, you get this understanding that you are required to be resilient, um because you're going to be faced with all these like difficulties. But what I said in like my TED talk is like, resilience should not be treated as like this should be a requirement and you're expected to be resilient, because inevitably we're going to subject you to pain and like suffering. But it should be like the the byproduct, the aftermath of like, an unexpected event that's quite traumatic or depressing, or something that's like a tragedy, but an aftermath because you were able to cope with it with the help of the different factors that I spoke about in the talk itself. So, and sometimes it's unfortunate because um it can be used like in a negative way, like you're okay, you're supposed to cope, you're a resilient person. But if there's a way to make it less, you know stressful, or less less of a tragedy, like whatever it is that supposed to help do that, the government, institutions, your family, friends, and other people, then resilience should not be the first line of defense, or resilience should not be step one. Your resilience should be like something that develops naturally because you got through the difficulties. And it's dangerous when um the idea of Filipinos resilience is overly romanticized, because it can be a temptation to not take care of that group of people, or not worry about their welfare as much, because now you just rely on like, no, these people will be okay, they're resilient anyway. So it can have several negative impacts. But I personally believe we are a resilient, nation. We're a people of, we choose most of the time to be happy despite the difficulties that we face as people, as a nation. But that doesn't mean that we cannot choose to be better, or we can't choose, or we don't have the power to pick what is better for us. And that should not be like a reason to allow things to stay like, bad, or stay in like a state that it is. So, yeah.
I completely agree with you. It's a byproduct of something that you went through. Um, and so I wanted to ask, why do you think people perceive Filipinos as resilient even in times of natural calamity and uncertainty?
Yeah, I personally experienced this like growing up. We used to live in like a place that gets flooded really badly um during the rain. And it's again, it can be influenced by a sense of um one, you have that personal sense of um spiritual guidance, or this like notion of um spirituality, that inevitably in all of these things we can rely on a greater power that can help us. And that's usually something that's inculcated in Filipino culture right away. Most of us are, but generally Filipinos are theistic. So, so I don't know the current statistics, but most of the time Filipinos you'll encounter will have some faith, whatever the religion is. Secondly, it's that sense of like I have to do something. Like if there is something going on, there's something wrong happening, I cannot just be like a victim of this. I need to come up with something to survive this because I need to push through in life. And so that sense of mission. And then the third one is the sense of community, like the idea, okay, it seems that we're in this middle of the flood. We're in the middle of the flood, and apparently people in power are not going to be able to help us directly. So who's going to help us? So that kind of like idea, like who's going to help us? Like the government's not going to come here because they're probably minding other things, or we're here in the middle of nowhere. So who's going to help us? The next person to help me is my neighbor. The next person that I can help immediately is my neighbor. So it's that kind of like, if no one will do it, that kind of like notion, kung walang gagawa, sinong gagawa? That's how Filipinos mostly think, right? Or if I'm not gonna, so if this situation is already depressing, what's my option? That kind of like it's almost like a growth mindset, so to speak. If my current situation is bad or dire, what do I do? Do I just wait for like, I have faith in Lord, I have faith in God, and like a certain spirituality. I feel like I have to do something, and I don't think anyone's gonna do it for me. So who's gonna do it? So I'll do it. Or if I see someone who's struggling, then maybe we can help each other. That kind of community, and that in itself develops resilience as well, both intrinsically and as influenced by your community. So that kind of like, and it's common for Filipinos. So we always say bayanihan. It's like a part of our culture. So that idea of like, okay, if my neighbor is struggling, I should be the one to help because I'm the closest person to um, that individual. So, and that helps develop resilience because now you're stronger as a community.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I can see that as well in the Philippines, in my province as well. Um, and so I wanted to ask, in relation to resilience, what is resilience to you, and how does being Filipino affect your definition of it?
Mm. That's a very good question. So, resilience to me is being able to empower yourself despite the difficulties that you're facing. To me, resilience is, you know, being aware of what's going on, having the ability to think about what's happening, what are my options, what are my strengths. It's another word that I'm very into is like metacognition. It's a form of metacognition. We always say in educational psychology, a resilient student is metacognitive because a resilient student will know what did I mess up with in this like assessment, an exam or this subject or this topic. How can I bounce back? And then you start looking for actual steps rather than this is bad, I failed. What now? So that like resilience is that like having the power, like knowing that you have the ability to change your situation by acting upon it or drawing from the community, your teachers, your family, your friends, the internet, whatever, books, the library. So having that kind of awareness and the willingness to try again, which is often, it is not an easy thing to develop, especially when you have like situations that are high stakes, and we're a I think we're a society at the moment that believes that everything is like catastrophic or like high stakes, whereas like I always say, it's like we have lost the concept of the try and try your best. We always just want to be best. The try is like something that most students or people like jump over, but then I always say, but to be the best means that you have to try, and to try means sometimes you'll fail, but then you won't be the best unless you keep trying. And you only keep trying when you develop that resilience that it's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay after this. And so I think as a Filipino, my definition of resilience, personal resilience, is shaped by my experiences growing up in the Philippines, going through like, geographically we suffer through like natural calamities left, right, and center. um Society, whatever is happening, the turmoil in society is not always like peaceful or not always like utopia, definitely. And financial instability as well in the family, but the idea is you can educate yourself, like that very notion, like we're poor, but at least you're educated. So you can find something that empowers you as a person. And that's how you develop resilience. And then you allow yourself some time to be stronger and better. Yeah. So resilience essentially from more Christian like outlook is like basically being hopeful, like,
Yeah.
having that kind of like thinking that things will be better if I work on it, and things will be better if, because God will help me, or things will be better because I have people to rely on. I like
And it reminds me of
that.
the title of your speech as Puhon Puhon. And I asked my Bisaya friends what that meant, and they said it was being hopeful or it's like a form of prayer to God. So it reminded me of that. Thank you so much for your answer. And lastly, somewhat related to what I said, are there any Filipino or Bisaya phrases that motivated you when you felt down?
Mm. Definitely Pohon Pohon is like something that my parents, because the context is my mom and dad both speak Bisaya, but when they moved to Manila, they decided not to teach their children directly Bisaya. So we're just exposed to the language. I can hear it, I can understand ever so slightly, but they did not actively teach us because they thought, and this is the common, like they thought that it will change our accent and we might get bullied like in Manila, because Visayans have like a certain accent, which is like unfortunate and definitely not true. I always tell my parents, you should have taught us
Hmm.
there, you should have exerted effort in teaching us Visaya. It would have been lovely if we could speak it. I mean, I could understand, like I could sit in a crowd and people are talking in Visaya or Cebuano. I'll understand what they're saying, but I will not be as confident as speaking Filipino or English. And another complication is like I grew up in Valenzuela, where my dialect of Tagalog is Bulaqueño, whereas my parents have, the conventional Filipino, like the Tagalog of the Filipino language. So I, like, so to speak, I speak a more malalim na Tagalog than my parents. So sometimes they don't understand what I'm talking about. Um, and so I always hear puhon puhon from my mom, or when things are rough, or like, oh gosh, we're struggling with, like, finances, and my mom would just say puhon puhon, will be able to do that. Or I'm like thinking about, oh no, I have this like graduation on this date and I still haven't paid my graduation fee. And it's like puhon puhon, you'll be able to, and then you think about your steps. That's the unique thing about at least my upbringing, is like puhon puhon, something will happen, but then, okay, so what do we do? at the So that kind of like empowerment as well, but then you make something happen because you have that sense of mission, that padayon or padayon, that you always hear, and which is something that we always say in the University of the Philippines as well. So when people graduate, we say padayon or padayon, which means onward. So there's no sense of like, okay, I did well, I struggled, or whatever. There's always like that next step. You always move forward. Another thing that my mom always says, like simbako, which is basically like when something happens, when you say something, oh my gosh, it's gonna be like bad. My mom will say like simbako, which means like, oh, I hope not, or like, God willing, it will not be horrible, something like that. So that she always say. But yeah, those are the like the things that my mom, basically it's my mom who always use the Visayan phrases, but it's always like pohon pohon that stuck to me as a child, even because my mom is like always saying pohon pohon. Like, I'm a little kid, why is she saying pohon pohon? For like, we're running out of like rice, pohon pohon will get like, what happens when we say that? So something like that. And obviously my parents, grew up in the province, so it's not as um financially affluent, and they moved to the city to work, and sent us to school. They really work hard to make sure that we get through, but it's still difficult. And so at some point, you're they indirectly teach you um how they cope, and that's like, like relying on, their faith, and empowering themselves to do whatever they can. And it's something that shaped me as a person as well. So it's like, I consider myself, I have like, I practice my faith really well, and I make sure that I don't stop at asking. Like, I always empower myself. What do I do after this? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your answer. So thank you so much, Sir Vaughn, for being here in this coffee chat with us. Thank you for your inspirational words and your experiences. And I know that it serves as a reminder, especially for me and all the Filipinos out there that have that resilient spirit. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much, Zing. I really appreciate it, and I wish that the students who are listening find solace and like strength in it as well, and especially if they're it's it's really tricky, I would say. It's a weird time to be a young person nowadays, with all the stress and all the things that are happening, and you're exposed to it through social media. Everything's like bombarded towards you. Um, and I say, it's like you go back to yourself. You try to find that ability to reflect, and be discerning or reflective as a student, as a person, as a young person, to find, what makes you strong, what drives you, what keeps you going. And I often say, make that external to your person, because you can only go so much with just thinking about yourself. But if you think about like that other person that you want to help, that other person that you want to empower, it usually motivates you or propels you even further. So, and it's something unique to the Filipino experience as well. Growing up, we're always like, like ang kabataan ng pag-asa ng bayan. You always think like you are the fair hope of motherland. It's always like directed to helping others, helping the society. Of course, empower yourself, because the only way you can help others be resilient is if you're resilient as well. But I find that one unique thing about Filipino children as well is that we're always motivated to empower ourselves because we want to empower others, which I think is something that you're doing at the moment as well with this, and so I'm really proud of you for that. And what a lot of young Filipinos are doing around the world as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. And I know
Thank you
that
so much.
everything will work out well. Bon, bon.
Thank you.